Hi, and welcome to the Rare Business Podcast. My name is Adrian Swinsko, and I'm a consultant, advisor, researcher, and writer on all things related to customer service and customer experience. Through this podcast, I seek out and interview CEOs, entrepreneurs, business and tech leaders, and leading thinkers about what it takes to build organizations that produce better outcomes for both customers and employees in this fast-moving modern age that we live in. If this is your first time listening to one of these interviews, then welcome, and please do dive into the archives at adrianswinsco.com, as I've now completed over 250 of these interviews in the last few years. If this is not your first time listening, then thank you for returning, and I'll aim to do a good enough job to keep you coming back week after week. Anyway, that's enough from me right now. Let's get into the interview. So, welcome to the next edition of the Rare Business Podcast. With me today, I am super excited because for the second time on this on the podcast, I have Seth Godin with us. And Seth, for those people who don't know, is a world-renowned marketeer and author of 18 international bestsellers. But hi, Seth, how are you doing?
I'm fantastic. Thank you for having me again. It's good to talk to you.
So, Seth, I guess it's probably because I'm a little bit of a fanboy, or actually a lot of a fanboy of your work. And so I'm saying that kind of blushing, but that's not, blushing's good on the radio or on the kind of or on a podcast, as it were, because you can't see it. But I think I'm always flabbergasted when I mention how much attention I pay to your work and how it sort of inspires me to think differently and do more in things. But there are some people that don't follow your work. And so for the benefit of our listeners and readers, it'd be fantastic if you could give us a bit of a thumbnail sketch on Seth Godin, the world of Seth Godin.
Well, I'm mostly a teacher, sometimes an entrepreneur. I've written, as you mentioned, 18 books. The 19th one is coming out. It's called This Is Marketing. Mm-hmm. I blog every day at seth.blog. And the thesis of my work is that if you can do work that matters for people who care, you don't have to spend a lot of time doing underhanded, spammy, attention-getting tricks. Mm-hmm. Instead, you can focus on doing work that matters.
Perfect. So, as you mentioned, your 19th book is coming out, and it's called This Is Marketing. And the subtitle being, You Can't Be Seen Until You Learn to See. So I have two questions, if I may, to start with. Is this feels like a magnum opus of sorts. Would that be correct?
Well, my Latin isn't that good, but I don't think I deserve a magnum opus. I think that what it is a summation, a call to action, right, as well as some important new thinking about how we live and work in a world where mass marketing is over, mm-hmm, and micro marketing has taken its place. The internet is not a mass medium. It is the largest micro medium in history. Mm-hmm. But it's tempting to want to be seen by everyone, to do something to, quote, get the word out.
Sure.
And my thesis is that addressing the smallest viable audience and doing it with care is not only more effective, but more satisfying than trying to pander to the masses.
Absolutely. And so the second part of my question was, I was really, really intrigued by the subtitle of the book, which is You Can't Be Seen Until You Learn to See. And that feels like it's like almost a different, another layer on the thesis, and so it starts to dig into it. I mean, can you explain to me what you mean by that? That can't be seen until you learn to see, because I think that's I sense it's an important point.
Yeah, no one wants what you want. No one believes what you believe. No one sees what you see. Okay. And it's naive to believe that the noise in our head is the same as the noise in everyone else's head.
Yes.
And if you want to engage with other people, you can't insist that they hear your noise. But maybe if you work hard at it, you could hear their noise.
Right. And so I guess my question is because this feels like a big change for marketeers that have grown up in, if you like, an industrialized version of marketing. So it's almost that, you churn it out and it's all about the channels and the frequency and the loudness and all these different sort of things. And that may be a challenge for many. So I mean, is this a tactics change, or is this a mindset change, or is it both?
Oh, I think it's a huge challenge because very few people go into marketing desiring to be empathetic.
Right.
They go into marketing because they want to put on a show, because they want to win, mm-hmm, and the idea of making an assertion and putting ideas into the world is more important than ever before. This is not about asking people what they want. What this is about is coming to conclusions about how people see things and then bringing them something and saying, here, I made this with the hope that it will resonate with what they've wanted all along.
Right. And so, I mean, empathy's hard to develop. I mean, so where should people start with some of this sort of stuff? Because it is a big change, and you can't just flick a switch. You've got to go on a bit of a journey, I guess. And so, how should people get started with this sort of stuff? Because it may actually feel quite daunting for many. They might get the call to action, but then don't necessarily have to start. What would you say? What would you suggest to them?
That's a brilliant question. And, we've been teaching the marketing seminar online for a couple of years. 6,000 people have taken it. So I've watched people go through this challenge. And the thing that shifted gears for most people was when I said, instead of thinking of yourself as a marketer, think of yourself as a teacher.
Right.
And the person you're trying to teach as a voluntary student, because there's no such thing as mandatory education. It's always got to have engagement associated with it.
Yeah.
So how do you seek enrollment? Once you have enrollment, how do you teach the other person the story you need them to believe and understand and embrace in order to make change happen? And if we can begin with just 10 students, not 1 million students or 10 million students, but just 10 students. If you can change 10 students, now you're on your way to being able to do it professionally.
Right. And when you say professionally, does that mean you can think about how you can scale that up and how it applies to larger numbers?
Well, I use the word professional. When I think of a professional, I think of a surgeon. There are no amateur surgeons.
Yes.
And when you go to a surgeon, you don't want vulnerability, and you don't even want authenticity. And you don't want a surgeon who's going to do a better job when she's in a good mood than when she's in a bad mood.
Yeah.
Now, what it means to be a professional is you make a promise and you keep it. And that promise isn't on your behalf, it's on their behalf. So there are amateur marketers everywhere who market when they feel like it, who tell a story that resonates with them in that moment. But I am hopeful that we can help people become professional marketers, which means that they will do the work they said they were going to do, regardless of what the terrain is like.
But it's also kind of, I think that the term when you talk about marketers is, it's not about qualifications and it's not about degrees and certifications and all these different things. It's almost like a way of being.
That's right. So what do marketers do? We change the culture. That's what marketers do. We make a change happen. And no license is required, no permit, no fancy degree, as you said. But there are more bad marketers in the world than any other profession. And that's because everyone is a marketer, but most people don't realize it.
Yes. Because actually you're there to solve problems, not, as you kind of say in the book, not companies' problems, but you're to solve your customers or your people's or your patients or your clients' kind of problems. So it's actually, what I was really intrigued about was also this other idea within the book. There's this idea around service, and marketing has service at its heart. So it's not something you do to people, but it's actually something you use to help kind of people. And given that service, the idea of service is an area that I explore, I thought that was kind of interesting, because I also think and that's something I've been thinking about recently, is that many people have a very interesting relationship to the word service and to serve. And that, again, creates a bit of a challenge, possibly a psychological and a cultural kind of challenge for many. So it's this leap, this transformation. It's very significant. The more I read into it and what I thought you were folding into it, I was thinking, yeah, this is a big deal. And there's some people are not going to be able to do this.
Definitely. And, you're previewing a section of the book that we don't talk about on the cover, but I think is one of the most important parts, which is this idea of status roles and affiliation versus dominance.
Right.
That some people have trouble with service. Some people have trouble with service because it feels like you are being subservient.
Yes,
the
indeed.
word service is insubservient. But when we think about our heroes, the Nelson Mandelas or the General Pattons of the world, they became heroic through service.
Yes.
And it is not this narcissistic me thing that actually allows somebody to be important in our culture. That what makes someone important, what raises their status, is that they figured out how to lead and how to be of service, not so they could be at the front of the parade, but so that the tribe that they are assembling and leading succeeds. And when that happens, that is the highest form of status we can offer somebody.
So, but it also kind of like it's also related to your kind of worldview and whether you think that life is a zero-sum game, either there's winners and losers, or that everybody can win as well, I guess. And so it kind of gets back to this almost like a fundamental question around how do you want to be, or how do you want to be in the world with the people around you?
Absolutely. If we think about an industrial Adam Smith capitalistic scarcity-based mindset, and the word economics comes from scarcity, then you pretty much quickly get into winners and losers.
Yes.
But if we accept that we live in a connection economy where ideas that spread win, where Metcalfe's law supersedes the law of scarcity, where a network with more people on it is more valuable than a network with no one on it, then the rules have changed. And the rules have gone from I have a factory and you don't, to I am part of a network. Do you want to join me?
Right. That's interesting. Forgive me, I feel like I'm circling around the same sort of like thing, but it just feels like there is a big problem, and one of the central problems around making the shift is all these different sort of things that I guess we've developed or we've surrounded ourselves with, whether it's an Adam Smith viewpoint or it's a kind of this industrial scale sort of marketing machine that we have. But then there's this other thing that you allude to, or you mentioned directly in the book. We use the word neophiliacs, which I thought it's a great kind of word, and it just made me think about whether marketeers and organizations, for that matter, are actually suffer from neophilism. You were always addicted to the new, and in order to be able to move to this idea of doing something in service to people and with people rather than actually doing something to people, we've got to almost like wean ourselves off our neophilism addiction. Are you kind of being addicted to everything new, particularly new technology or new trends or new memes or so on and so forth? And so it feels like there's a number of different levels that we've got to try and unpick before, or maybe in a way unlearn. You used the teaching idea earlier. We've got to unlearn some stuff to be able to take on a new perspective or a new journey.
Well, I think it depends on who you are seeking to serve. So if we take a look at the most valuable corporation in the history of the world, for the first 25 years or so, Apple served the neophiliacs. They said, if you want to be on the frontier, if you want to help invent the next generation of digital good taste and connection, Apple will be on the frontier with you. And since Tim Cook has taken over, he has dramatically increased the value of the company and completely abandoned the neophiliacs.
Yeah.
They haven't had a significant new product introduction in more than 6 years. And that's because he worked for the shareholders, and he understood that the best way to increase profit was to use the momentum he got from the neophiliacs to reach other people who don't want the world to change every day. And so this is a choice, right? It's a choice. And you can decide to live on the vanguard, to make that promise to your people, or you can decide to live in the middle of the curve. And there's nothing wrong with either one.
Yeah.
The challenge is if you make the wrong promise to the wrong people.
Right. So, I mean, what you're actually kind of not then advocating is that we abandon all firms and all people and all marketeers, abandon the more traditional way of doing things. This is only, because you refer to it in the book as a method, is only going to be suitable for some people.
Well, if I take myself as an example, I serve the neophiliacs. I have not put in any effort to be on television, to reach a larger audience, to find more readers for my writing. Instead, I do writing for my readers.
Yes.
And that was an intentional decision I took about 7 years ago, where I said, I don't want to chase the sequel and the make this idea bigger, bigger, bigger world. I want to have the luxury of work in a studio and say, here, I made this to the group of people that want my new thing.
Yes.
And that's fine because my smallest viable audience is pretty small and I'm okay with it.
Yeah. I mean, so it's a bit like like you say, it's almost like getting really focused on that minimum viable audience. I think in the book you use an example. I have a friend, Minter, who is a big Grateful Dead fan, so I know that I'll point him to the podcast when it comes out, and so he'll like the fact that I've mentioned his name and that he's also a Grateful Dead fan. But you mentioned the Grateful Dead in the book and how they've been extraordinarily successful, consistently and sustainably over, I don't know, is it 40 years now, if not longer? And it's because they focused on, rather than trying to be in the charts, the game that they played was, we're going to focus on our audience. And the bargain's very clear. Then we start small and then it grows from there.
That's right. In the U.S., they only had one top 40 hit.
Right.
And that one hit actually hurt them for a very long time. Because what that one hit did was bring a whole different crowd to their shows.
Right.
And that crowd was more violent and more into drugs. And as a result, the shows suffered for years. Mm-hmm. But when they weren't having that one hit, what they were doing was finding music for their listeners and putting on a show for their listeners. And it turns out that 2 or 3 million people who desperately love your work is enough to be the number one touring band in America for year after year after year.
Excellent. I mean, to bring all this to life, I mean, I know there's a lot of stories in the book that sort of about, people and companies that are already operating in this in the manner that you're advocating, marketing that has service at its heart and trust and empathy, and it's about helping solving somebody else's or their problems rather than the company's problems, and the benefits then come to you sort of indirectly. Could you share with us a couple of examples of either companies and or individuals that you think actually this is what they've done and this is how they've kind of done it, sort of to bring this approach to life, so make it kind of real for people?
Oh, I'd be delighted. So humility, we need to have humility whether we want to or not, because the marketplace won't let us buy arrogance.
Sure.
And in the book, I tell the story of Penguin Magic, which is a multi-million-dollar company.
I love that because I was going to ask you about that one, so thank you for doing that.
And, Penguin is completely kicking Amazon's butt in the category in which they work. And the category in which they work is interesting magic for amateur magicians,
right,
who have resources. So maybe Penguin has 100,000 loyal customers, but they show up because there's a new product 3 times a week, and
right.
the only way to learn how to do the trick is to buy the product. And they use video and they use email and they cater to this group obsessively. Another example I give you: someone just turned me on to a guy who has a wine newsletter. And twice a week, he sends a newsletter out to his group of people about a particular kind of wine he was able to get for 1/3 the price. If you like it, you write back. He adds it to your shipment, and twice a year, your shipment comes in the mail.
Right.
These are happy, successful businesses that are changing a certain group of people. We already talked about the Grateful Dead. We could talk about that restaurant in town that isn't like every other fish and chips restaurant. It's the one that costs 3 times as much.
Sure.
But in return, you get a different kind of experience. And if someone comes to them and says, why aren't you cheap like the other ones? The owner can happily say, here's the business card of a cheap one down the street. Tell him I sent you.
Yes.
Because it's not for you.
Mm-hmm.
And what we get to do as marketers, if we want to change our corner of the culture, whether we're a politician or a fish and chip store, is we get the chance to say, I made this for you, not for you. Mm-hmm. You're one of those kinds of people that like this sort of thing. I'm here for you.
Yes. I think thank you for that. I think the interesting thing about the Penguin Magic story, when I read it in the book, was that it explodes that sort of, or not explores that sort of distinction around it's not for you, it's for you, it's not for you, is that you explain that this is not for professional magicians, because professional magicians will only need to know a handful of tricks because they'll play to different audiences. They'll go on tour and play at different audiences at different times, so they don't necessarily need an infinite number of kind of tricks. Whereas the distinction you were making was that actually this is for more amateur magicians that are playing to the same crowd, and therefore the number of tricks they need to know needs to grow to keep their audience, which is fixed, sort of entertained. And which is fascinating because it's truly about understanding your customers and as people and almost their customers or their audience as well, which I thought was fascinating. I read it and I thought it's a fascinating and great sort of example of what it means to truly understand your customers and actually to make that distinction to say it's not for everybody.
And, sometimes people will push back and say, are you saying that we shouldn't have a home run, that home runs are bad? And I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is millions and millions of marketers are trying to have a home run, and only seven are having one.
Yes.
So if you like those odds, please proceed.
Yeah.
But I don't like those odds. I think that our work is too important to have us strike out over and over and over again in the hope that we will become the most popular viral video of all time.
Yes.
In the hope that Heinz Ketchup will buy our company and make us the next ketchup. That's unlikely to happen. So given that that's so unlikely and getting more unlikely by the day, doesn't it make more sense to have the guts to choose a small audience where you can live or die on them and then have no choice but to delight them? Not just, all right, I'll go down the street. You're like, you burn your boats and you say, here I am, and I am here for you.
Yeah. But I think that it's an interesting thing because it's something that's similar to what I've experienced in my own sort of career, and I've also going to sort of relate to other people, is the idea is that what do you think it's better to be, sort of an inch thick and a mile wide? So you're trying to appeal to everybody, or to try and maybe have pillars which are an inch thick and a mile sort of deep. And because then you get focus and you get relevance, but also the other thing you benefit from is this idea of adjacency. Then you start to attract people that are next to the people that you are saying this is for you. And then there becomes this social effect where people turn around and go, well, I want to be like them, or I want to be part of that group. And then it can spread that way.
Exactly. Metcalfe's law.
Right.
So Metcalfe's law was, he invented Ethernet.
Right.
And what he discovered, the original product was you could hook up 3 computers to 1 printer. And given the hassle, that didn't really sell very well. But then he realized that he could hook up many computers to 1 network. And the cost of being left out of the network keeps going up as more people join the network.
Right.
The value of the network goes up algorithmically, exponentially, excuse me. And so as a result, success breeds more success.
Yes.
And that's what we see in every corner of our culture. And yet, old-fashioned marketers are completely missing it.
And so this also kind of feels like, if I think of my audience, they're going to be a mix of entrepreneurs and also kind of people that are in larger sort of organizations. I can understand how it might be easier for entrepreneurs or people that are independent or freelancers being able to understand and get this and sort of double down on it and go, right, well, I'm going to pick my minimum viable audience, or identify my minimal viable audience, and then aim to serve them. But from a larger organization, which will get stuck in the mechanics of budgeting and quarterly cycles and annual planning and campaigns and all those different sort of things, what would you be your advice for, or advice to a professional or a leader in that sort of space in terms of, we need to try something different? Is this something that they should be trying to add in to their mix, and so then they end up sort of displacing it, or does it mean they actually should completely revise their approach?
Well, I'm angling for a religious conversion here.
Okay.
I'm not pushing a couple tactics that you can bolt on to old thinking.
Yes.
I would say to the CEO, I'd say to her, would you like to be as valuable as Slack, which last time around was valued at $6 billion?
Yeah.
Because they only have 8 million users. And of the 8 million users, almost none of them pay for it. And yet they're worth $6 billion.
Yes.
That I can go down the list from camera equipment to theater publishing rights to anything you want to mention. And the high performers, with the exception of the lucky mass market outliers, the high performers are the ones who are specific not
Right.
general. And I'm basically arguing that A, specific is the best path, and B, specific puts you on the hook. And if you're willing to be responsible for delighting the specific, then I think this is your best option.
I love that, and that feels like a really good place to sort of almost like end in many ways. It's like, because it's like a challenge. Are you willing to delight the specific?
I agree, and I think that if people are looking for sugarcoating, you and I are not going to give it to them. But
No.
the good news is that marketers get all the fancy snacks and get to have fun at work. The bad news is sometimes we have to do things that are scary.
And actually, the other thing is like, whilst you might be, I think it's important to add is like, also, this is not easy, and it requires work that you've never been accustomed to before, because it requires you to be vulnerable, it requires you to listen, to have empathy, to care, to be compassionate, all these different sort of things. And it's different. It's a different type of work. And I think people will start having to develop emotional muscles that they've never what's that old saying, which is like, I'm hurting in places where I never knew I had muscles.
I never even knew I had places.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's the reality of it. But it's a huge growth opportunity. But if people have the courage to serve the specific, or serve and delight the specific, as you brilliantly said, I think that's a great challenge. And with that, kind of, Seth, I just want to say once again, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. I mean, I'm loving the book. I'm looking forward to it kind of coming out, because it's, as you say, it's a summation. It's like a composite. It's a synthesis of a lot of stuff you've been talking about for the longest time. But it is in everything, in a long way. It's like both a call to action and a manifesto to say this has got to change, because if we want to make a change, if we want to increase relevance, if we want to do work that matters, then it's not going to happen by accident. We have to do something about it. So for that, I say thank you. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Well, thank you. And thank you for doing this podcast. I know it can be thankless sometimes, so I'm here to say, keep it up. It matters.
Thank you.
Well, that's it for another interview. I really hope you enjoyed it. Now, every time I complete one of these interviews, I learn something new. And I try and incorporate that new learning into my writing, my speaking, my workshops, and the consulting that I do for my clients. If you're interested, you can find out more about how I work with clients over at adrianswinsko.com. But one final thing before I go, please consider heading over to iTunes or whichever podcast platform you choose to use, and do leave a review. Every little helps, as they say. Anyway, that's all for now. Thank you for listening, and do listen in again. All the very best.